So I'm joined today by Glyn Stanfield and Paul Woodgates. The question is, obviously, has the Labour and Jeremy Corbyn's promise been a black swan, an event that has turned all our assumptions on its head? And where might a future settlement lie? What does higher education need to hold on to absolutely to be successful in the future? So, Paul, can I invite you to make some comments?
Thank you, Neil, and morning everyone. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity of speaking today. It's great to be here and address this subject. I thought it might be interesting to just reflect on what we're seeing from our work around the sector and what we're hearing from university senior management teams in particular about their reaction to the events that Neil's just been outlining. Neil, you were talking about what the government wants, and I thought it might be just interesting to look around the other side of the table and look at what the sector wants, what it needs from the political and financial settlement, if you like. I'm going to talk specifically about undergraduates and the fee regime around them, though clearly that is only part of the picture. I know Glyn is going to pick up a little bit on the wider environment as well, postgraduates and research funding and so on. But I'm going to sort of focus on undergraduates. I think there are three things broadly that, excuse me, that universities need from the funding settlement. The first is they need a means of attracting students so that they can deliver their academic mission around education. They need the ability to develop programs that students want to study, that they can recruit motivated, capable, qualified students to do. And they need there to be a pool of those students who they can recruit. The second thing they need is income. They need funding in order to run their operations. The model has to provide them with the income that's required to cover the costs of teaching and of the wider student experience that goes around that. Accepting that there has always been an acceptance of cross-subsidy between cohorts of students. We've always subsidised between low-cost courses and high-cost courses. We've always subsidised widening participation and access type activities. And perhaps more controversially, we've always subsidised used student fees to subsidise research. And we might talk about that in due course. But universities need the pool of resource that pays for those things. And then the final thing they need is stability, some degree of certainty about the future that allows them to invest in the expectation, not the absolute certainty, but a reasonable expectation that the situation when at the point that they invest allows them to know that they'll get value from that investment and make a return. So the three things they need then are some demand, some income, and some certainty to support investment. So how much has what's happened over the last few months that Neil's outlining impacted on those three things? Well, the first one around demand, clearly there's lots going on around questioning the value of traditional higher education, the traditional model of degrees and so on. I think it's fair to say, though, that was already happening. There's already been interest in degree apprenticeships, in other forms of higher learning beyond the sort of traditional model, and many universities are changing their approach in order to take advantage of that. There is a debate clearly to be had about the value to a student and the value to society of undergraduate education. But as I say, that was happening anyway. I don't think that's certainly not been created in the last few months. What I think has changed is the sort of political rhetoric, the antagonism towards universities over that period that it does feel has changed. It's interesting to reflect that when we moved from grant-based public funding to a system of student fees, to first £3,000 then £9,000 fees, what we did not see was a government sort of stepping back from believing that it had a role in defining value for money and what students should get for their money. In fact, the opposite. We're now moving to a tighter regulation, more aggressive regulation than we had in the past. I don't think it's reasonable to believe that if we move back to some degree of public funding, that's going to go away again. If anything, I suspect it will become more severe. We will find that government feels it has an even bigger role in regulating the sector if we move back to public funding. So the role of the political element in managing the regime, I think, will become greater than it has in the past. I think that's probably inevitable. And that clearly has impacts for university independence and so on. So that's the demand picture. The resource picture, Neil's already touched on. In principle, there is nothing to suggest that universities will end up with less money than they have now, but I think most management teams believe that's the direction of travel, that we will end up with a reduction in the unit of resource for teaching compared to what we had in the past, or what we have now. And that is the history at the time of growth in student numbers and growth in proportion of participation. During that period, the unit of resource went down when it was publicly funded, and only increased when we got to student fees. So that's a reasonable fear. And we're already seeing signs of that by putting a cap on the fee level, which has already been announced and is already beginning to impact or will in the future. So clearly, resourcing is an issue. And then finally, I talked about certainty. Everything's back up in the air. As you say, Neil, it didn't feel like it at the time, but earlier this year, actually, the environment was quite stable. Clearly, we were focused on Brexit and visa controls and those things. But when you look back, that was quite a sort of a set of things to be concerned about. Now, I think the concern is that we have a potentially everything back up in the air about how universities are funded, and that drives questions about what they're even for, what their place in society is, whether they have a societal good, a public good, in addition to the mission, if you like, to educate individual students and provide benefits to them. And that changes the landscape for planning quite considerably, I think, and has the risk of stifling investment, perhaps stifling innovation and so on. We're having one discussion with the management team a little while ago where we're using the sort of typical sporting analogy and saying this isn't so much moving the goalposts, this is announcing what after we've kicked the ball that actually we're playing tennis, that potentially everything is now different in ways that can't be predicted. And it's perhaps that is the biggest impact on the sector at the moment. If we enter a period of sort of planning blight where universities feel unable to make big decisions, and in particular to commit resources and take risk for big investment decisions, that could genuinely stifle innovation and change, which is precisely what the sector needs and would be a real shame at the current time.